Hello there my friends, welcome to my another video. Today we are working on this M103 in 1 to 72nd scale from Dragon. This looks to be an interesting kit of a very interesting tank. After all, it's the last heavy tank that the America ever produced, and I was just thinking that it would be fun to work on it. So let's get right into it. We start the assembly as always by snipping the parts out of the sprue using sharp side cutters. This model is very different from other Dragon kits that I've had because it's got one-piece tracks, and honestly it doesn't even feel like a Dragon kit. Everything went together pretty nicely. The tracks are kind of simplified due to the assembly process. They are missing the guide teeth, but this is just a quick little project before something a little more complicated next time, so I will just build it out of the box. I decided to stray from the instructions and assemble the turret as well as the hull before everything else that the instructions told me to, and that's because I wanted to add some cast texture to the tank, because this is a huge cast turret and I really want to show that it's a heavy tank. And I am using a very simple cast texture method right here. I simply cover the area with a Tamiya cement and then I dab the surface with a sponge, which creates nice pitted textured surface. However, it's not as serious as on a Soviet tank, and this technique is specifically perfect for that because it's not a really heavy texture, but it's still there and it'll add a lot to the model. I then continue assembling the model per instructions. I decided to replace a few parts with wires. Here you can see me replacing the front light covers with a wire because they are out of the scale and really thick in the original kit. While I had the wire out, I replaced other parts as well. Here you can see me replacing the towing hooks on the mantlet. I also decided to replace the huge handles on the sides of the turret because they were really thick and monolithic in the kit, and this is a simple little modification that will put the model onto a higher standard. Otherwise, there weren't many parts in the kit and it went together really nicely. Quite different from my average Dragon experience, where it usually has quite a few parts and stuff, but here I just simply assembled everything and it was ready for painting. So I start the painting process by priming the model with a black primer, but this is a mecha primer from Viejo, and I cover the entire model with this color, making sure I cover all of the crevices and stuff like that. So if I don't paint them with the camouflage color, this black color will create a fake shadow that will make the badly painted parts a little less visible. Then I started painting the model in an average olive green color. This should be a color of your choosing because, you know, everyone has their preferences. I wanted to use a British dark olive green color because I thought it would be closer to the American olive green, but looking at pictures of these vehicles in real life, the closest color I had was actually German olive green from the Hintenhalt Tarnuk, so I just used that on the model. After the model was properly sprayed with this color, I started post-shading. Post-shading is a method where you post-shade the final color to give it more depth and more highlights and make it look more three-dimensional and realistic. This is one of my most favorite techniques because it really transforms the model into something that looks a little more professional than your average model. The gist of the technique is basically you add a lightening color or will highlight color into your paint mixture and you start painting highlights with it. Here you can see me, I used a buff color to lighten the olive green. You can also use white, but that will desaturate the color. My basic technique of highlighting is basically I highlight towards the middle if it's a horizontal panel, like here you can see me doing on the mudguards, and if it's vertical like side of the turret I highlight towards the upper parts of the vehicle, and basically anywhere I would expect the vehicle to get highlighted and get more light. This also creates artificial shadows around details, which then helps out the wash, and sometimes if it's done well enough, you almost don't even need a wash, and I've been considering not using a wash here, but it does put the model onto a higher standard. I do this with several lighter and lighter colors until I'm happy with the result. You can push the contrast really far to get a really contrasty looking paint job, and you might think that it's too much. However, all of the washes and all of the weathering effects will cover this up and make it way less visible, and that's why I overdo the highlights. This was my best post-shading technique up to that point, and I was really happy with it. So it was time to start painting all of the small details. There's not many on this tank. I decided to paint the jerrycans in a different shade of olive green, just to make them stand out while not making them completely out of place and unrealistic. I painted the 50 cal with an average black color. That's just the color that I prefer using on stuff like P50 cals. Then I started painting the rims of the wheels with black as well. For the tracks, I simply went over them with a heavily diluted brown color to simulate rust. You could push this technique even further with other shades of brown. I will show this in the next video. However, I was planning to make these tracks really muddy, so I didn't really wanna spend time on making the rust if I was gonna cover it anyway, since this was supposed to be just a quick little project to hype me up for the more complicated next project. After adding the decals, I varnished the model and it was time for washes. I decided to use a brown enamel wash. This is why I also varnish the model. The varnish protects the acrylic color from enamel thinner that I use for blending the wash and also thinning the wash. I apply the wash around all of the details where I think it's necessary, and I blend it with an enamel wash as I mentioned, making sure that I don't leave tide marks. However, as you can see, the wash is already tinting the color brownish because of the color of the wash, and this isn't necessarily a bad thing. It does make the vehicle look more weathered, and I really like that, but again, it would make the model really dark, and in 1:72 scale that's the last thing you want, because a really dark model in 70-second scale is really hard to look at and it's not that attractive. You want it to be nicely bright, because that's how basically the optical illusion works. Then it was time for some chipping. This was supposed to be a vehicle in a service, so I didn't do as much chipping as I normally would, but also I did more chipping that I should have, maybe. I don't know, I just started chipping the model with a rusty color using a sponge method. Sponge method is basically you take a piece of kitchen sponge, you dip it into your chipping color of choosing. I chose Vallejo Panzer Aces Dark Rust for this. I unload most of the paint onto a napkin, and then I slowly dab around where I find the areas where I think would be most rusty, and I dab them to create the chipping effect. I then switched up to a metallic color, and I used it on the parts where there is really thin steel, aka the more or less mainly the skirts and the mudguards, because a cast hull wouldn't chip into a silvery finish. That's probably just something that wouldn't happen, and this is a nice way to distinguish the materials of the vehicle. Then I went over all of the rusty chips with a rust wash. This is again an enamel wash. The gist of it is basically the same as the previous wash. I apply it where I think it suits, and then I blend it around with an enamel thinner. However, this time I don't apply it around details, but I apply it around the chips. After this was all blended, it was time to start weathering the model. I first started pre-shading, or well, pre-dusting the model. This is a desaturated dusty color that I mixed from buff and grey, and I applied everywhere where I would expect the model to get dusty. I also experimented with applying it on upper areas where the mudguards are. I applied it to the crevices between the mudguards and the reinforcement of the mudguard. This created a nice effect that I've been missing on my models because they look kind of unnatural, being dirty only on the bottom and not on the top. This kind of lightened the model as well, made it nicely look pretty nice and desaturated. Again, this is a thing that you decide on yourself about how dirty you want your vehicle and what kind of dirt you want to apply to it. I was using a picture of a Starship, I believe is the nickname for that version of the M60, as a reference for this kind of weathering, and it showed the running gear being completely covered in dust, basically not even showing any green. So that's what I basically did, almost. I did leave some original paint shining through, and then I applied heavy dark mud on top of it, according to the reference. This is a Vallejo acrylic mud. Since it's acrylic, it's easily spreadable, it dries pretty quickly, and you can use water to blend it around, which is what I did, because otherwise it would look pretty unnatural. On the tracks, I applied it basically everywhere I possibly could, and then I went over it with a finger, scraping down all of the mud from the clads that would have contacted the ground the most, and then I simply dabbed the wheels with the mud as well, because in real life it looks like just huge chunks of mud thrown around, not blended, not anything, so I wanted to recreate that effect, and with that the model was done, and it's time for the spinny bit. So I'm really happy with how this model turned out. It's probably my best model up to this point. However, I've already made one that's better. This seems to be quite the theme of my videos. I keep getting better, and I'm really happy that that's the case, and I'm happy that you're here with me to watch my progress in becoming a better modeler and showing you how I do it, so maybe you can try the techniques as well. So if you'd like to not miss out on the next videos, please do consider subscribing. Show me that you enjoy these videos by giving me a like, maybe support me by Patreon or by Coffee, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye!